Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Iranian media reported on Friday that Iran will resume talks with the United Kingdom, France, and Germany next week on sanctions and the nuclear issue. The meeting comes as the three European parties to the 2015 nuclear deal, known as the E3, have threatened to trigger so-called snapback sanctions against Iran for not being in compliance with the accord. The option to trigger the snapback expires on October 18th, but the E3 are threatening to do so by the end of August. Per UN Resolution 2231, the sanctions can be reimposed via the parties submitting a complaint to the UN Security Council if Iran is deemed to be in non-compliance. The US withdrew from the nuclear deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions of its own on Tehran. The UK, France, and Germany, and also Russia and China, remained party to the deal. But Iran is no longer in compliance with its stipulations. Iran is currently enriching uranium at 60%, well above the 3.67% level mandated in the agreement, and not far from the weapons-grade level of 90%. The E3 wrote in a letter this month that they are prepared to trigger the sanctions if Iran is not willing to, quote, reach a diplomatic solution before the deadline. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi referred on Friday to, quote, legal and moral incompetence of the countries over the possible resort to the snapback and warned of, quote, consequences for such an action. In this episode, we hear from Al Monitor State Department correspondent Elizabeth Hagedorn. Elizabeth takes us through whether Iran and Europe will reach a deal, the significance of the snapback sanctions, what Iran might do in response, and whether the U.S.'s own negotiations with Iran are a priority for the Trump administration. Hope you enjoy. Elizabeth, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, what is your take on the reports that Iran and the E3 will hold talks next week? Does this mean a deal to stave off the snapback is any closer?
Adam, my interpretation is no. And that's because the E3 has laid out two conditions for Iran that Iran seems unlikely to meet in less than 10 days. Those conditions being that Iran needs to return to nuclear talks with the United States and resume cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency. I've just seen no indication that Iran is willing to budge on either of those demands set by the Europeans. And for that reason, I still think snapback is likely to occur by the end of this month. As one E3 official put it to me yesterday, the Iranians seem rather resigned to snapback happening. It's almost like they're treating it as a foregone conclusion.
And what would be the significance of Iran becoming subject to these snapback sanctions, especially considering they are already facing a number of sanctions from the US?
Yeah, it's a good question because in some ways this is more of a political tool to be used by the so-called E3 than it is an economic one. Existing US and European sanctions, as you reference, have already heavily limited Iran's ability to interact with the global financial system. And the Trump administration continues to pile on sanctions, especially targeting Iran's oil sector through its so-called maximum pressure campaign. But, the return of these sanctions would have an impact. It could cause Iranians and international investors to lose further confidence in Iran's already depreciated currency and just generally deepen the sense of pessimism surrounding Iran's economic trajectory.
Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi warned that there might be consequences of any snapback. What do you think Iran might do in response to that mechanism being implemented?
Well, Iran has long threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty if the E3 goes through with snapback. That treaty from 1970 is sort of the centerpiece of global efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. And an NPT withdrawal by Iran would almost entirely shut the door to diplomacy between it and the West. But for now, the Iranians are starting to signal that they would take a more measured response, at least initially. So instead of withdrawing from the treaty, you could imagine Iran reducing its relations with France and Germany and the UK if and only if they go through with snapback at the end of this month.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Elizabeth Hagedorn after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Elizabeth, pivoting to the U.S., why do you think the talks with the Trump administration haven't resumed, even though Iranian officials have signaled that they would be open to that? And where does the Trump administration stand currently on a potential new nuclear agreement with Iran?
I just don't get the sense it's a priority for the Trump administration right now, which has its hands full currently with Gaza and Ukraine. I think the US position right now, to the extent there is one, is to support the E3 in triggering these sanctions and then hope that Iran is under enough pressure to come back to the negotiating table down the line and make some real concessions, not just on its nuclear activity, but also on its regional proxies and ballistic missile program. Following the US strikes on Iran back in June, we heard Trump's go-to negotiator, Steve Witkoff, talk about the need for a comprehensive peace deal with the Iranians. He did not elaborate on what he meant by that. I think that the Trump administration, does have ambitions of a bigger deal with the Iranians. But again, it appears to be on the back burner for this administration and certainly for Witkoff, who is the point person for Gaza and Ukraine.
Elizabeth, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting from Washington.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.